The pop of the champagne cork echoed through the glass-walled conference room like a gunshot. For me, Elise Barrett, it might as well have been. It felt like the sound had ripped straight through my chest, across the ridiculously expensive fingerprint magnet. Table on the 37th floor of that Chicago high-rise, my cousins, Andrew and Logan Barrett, clinked their flutes. Their smiles were so smug, they practically radiated. I sat at the far end, a deliberate island of silence, staring at the stack of the termination papers they'd slid across the polished surface. It wasn't just a stack of paper. It was a final, casual insult to everything I'd poured into Barrett Dynamics. Finally free, Andrew declared, lifting his glass a little higher, his Wharton MBA practically gleaming on his forehead. Barrett, Dynamics can now reach its full potential. Logan, ever the glib wingman with his communications degree, added with a smirk, no more dead weight in IT support. He actually looked right at me. That's all you ever were, Elise. Uncle David kept you around out of some misplaced family loyalty, but this isn't a family pet project anymore. This is business. My hands, surprisingly, were steady as I picked up the papers. Inside, though, a Category 5 hurricane was raging. 21 years. My entire adult life, my passion, my sweat and sleepless nights, all dismissed with a few strokes of a pen. I'm 38 years old. I was just a kid, 17, when I first walked into my uncle's company. Back then, Barrett Dynamics was a small-time parts manufacturer, churning out mechanical gears and basic switch panels. Nothing flashy, just solid, dependable stuff that kept machines humming. We were barely scraping by, but there was an honesty to it. From day one, I was the odd one out. Andrew, 5 years my senior, waltzed off to Wharton and returned acting like he'd personally invented capitalism. Logan, 3 years older, could charm a squirrel out of its winter stash. They were the polished front men, always impeccably, dressed, loud, and masters at taking credit for work that wasn't theirs. And then there was me, the quiet one, the one who actually loved the hum of the production floor, the intricate dance of circuits, the precision of CAD software. While they were schmoozing at country clubs, or networking, which mostly involved expensive dinners, I was under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the workshop, teaching myself to code, to solder, to rebuild motorized systems component by component. "You've got the brain of a designer, Elise," Uncle David used to say, his voice warm as he watched me sketch out a prototype for a voice-activated panel system. Maybe even a genius. He saw something in me. But to Andrew and Logan, I was just the girl with grease stains on her jeans and a head full of weird ideas. When I was 23, I designed our first adaptive sensor grid. They patted me on the head and called it Elise's Little Science Fair Project. Funny how that science fair project pulled in our first major contract. A few years later, when I created the voice-controlled panel that became our flagship product line, the one that put Barrett Dynamics on the map, they branded it as a Barrett Innovation. I was usually hidden behind the demo screens during presentations, the silent architect of their success. But here's the kicker, the beautiful little secret they never bothered to uncover. Every single patent application we'd ever filed, the motion-triggered relay boards, the wireless security interface, the energy-saving actuator arrays, listed me as the sole inventor. Sure, they filed them under the company name, standard procedure. But U.S. patent law is a funny, wonderful thing. Inventorship? That can't be reassigned, no matter how many bottles of Veuve Clicquot executives pop to celebrate their genius. Are you going to sign those or just keep glaring? Andrew's impatient voice snapped me back to the present. He tapped his watch. We've got a call with the Tokyo buyers in 30 minutes. Big order coming through for the smart grid line, the smart grid line, my smart grid line. 5 years of my weekends, countless rewrites, thousands of micro-tests. Every single component, every line of code, engineered in the lab they were now so eager to erase me from. A slow, calm smile spread across my face. "Of course," I said, my voice even. I picked up a pen and signed the paper with a flourish. I'll clear out my things this afternoon. That won't be necessary, Logan cut in, his tone sharp. Security has already boxed up your personal items. They're waiting for you in the lobby. Keycard and company phone, please. I rose slowly, deliberately. I placed my keycard and the company-issued phone on the gleaming table. Then, I turned towards the elevator. Oh, and Elise, Andrew called after me, his voice dripping with that infuriating condescension. You remember the non-compete clause, right? No working for any competitors for 3 years. I paused at the door, turning just enough to meet his gaze. My smile wasn't the usual accommodating one they were used to. This one was sharper, colder. I remember everything. What they'd forgotten, or more accurately, never bothered to read, was a little gem buried in the original contract language from 15 years ago. A clause I'd insisted on when Uncle David was still alive and valued foresight. It stated that while the company owned the products developed during my employment, the intellectual property rights for any inventions where I was the named inventor remained mine. The moment I was no longer an employee, their automatic licensing to use that IP vanished. Poof. Enjoy your meeting with the Tokyo delegation, boys, I said, the smile still firmly in place. As I walked out of that glass and steel monument to their egos, clutching a single, surprisingly light cardboard box of desk clutter, they hadn't even bothered to pack my industry awards. I pulled out my personal phone. My fingers were already dialing. Harrison? It's Elise Barrett, I said, the city noise a dull roar behind me. Remember that contingency plan we talked about? The one for a rainy day? A brief pause. Then Harrison Lowe's calm, unsurprised voice came through. He was my patent attorney, probably the only person outside the company who truly understood the sheer scope of what I'd built, and more importantly, how I'd protected it. They finally pulled the trigger, did they? Just now, I confirmed, stepping into the surprisingly bright Chicago afternoon. 2-1 vote. Uncle David's shares were split evenly between Andrew and Logan after he passed. They control the board now. And they don't know? Harrison asked, a hint of something that might have been amusement in his voice. Not a clue, I replied, a genuine laugh bubbling up for the first time that day. They never read the actual filings, never questioned why the IP clauses on my inventions looked a little different. They just assumed everything defaulted to Barrett Dynamics. Here's what my business genius cousins, with their fancy degrees and inflated salaries, never bothered to understand. There are 2 main kinds of patent assignments. The first, standard corporate practice, transfers all rights to the company from day one. The second, which I had meticulously and deliberately used for every single one of my inventions for the last 5 years, grants only a limited use license. That license was tied directly to my employment. Ownership? That stayed, firmly with the inventor. Me. It was a subtle distinction, buried in legalese, but legally it was an ironclad fortress. And since technical paperwork was always Elise's job, they'd never looked twice. How many patents are we talking about, Elise? Harrison asked, the calm in his voice a comforting anchor. I slid into my trusty, slightly battered Prius, a stark contrast to the luxury sedans in the executive parking garage. 17, I said. And that includes the entire smart grid suite, every single update to our embedded firmware, the automation logic, and the full mobile control ecosystem. A long, slow whistle came down the line. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, Harrison said, drawing out his words, Barrett Dynamics has been operating under licensing agreements that, as of your termination, have automatically expired. Today. Correct, I said, a grin spreading across my face. As of approximately 10 minutes ago, they are infringing on 17 of my patents. How fast do you want to move on this? He asked. I thought of the champagne pop, the smirks, the term dead weight. I thought of the box in my passenger seat. How fast can you send out the cease and desist letters? Elise, Harrison said, and I could almost hear him smiling. I've had them drafted for 2 years. I just need to add today's date. There wasn't a hint of apology in his voice, just pure professional preparedness. Are you absolutely sure about this? This is going to get very loud, very quickly. I thought of all those boardroom meetings where I was talked over, my ideas dismissed until a man presented them as his own. I thought of Andrew and Logan, preening over their successes built on my foundation. I thought of being handed my walking papers like I was nothing. Send them, Harrison, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. Send every last one. The weekend was quiet, unnaturally so. I spent it in my sanctuary, the one place I always felt truly myself, my garage workshop. Years ago, I'd converted it from a dusty space for forgotten lawnmowers into a fully functional prototyping lab. 3D printers hummed their creative song, soldering benches gleamed under focused lights, and my CNC mill stood ready. The air smelled of opportunity, a mix of sawdust, heated plastic, and the distinct aroma of freedom. My personal phone buzzed intermittently. Texts from former coworkers, mostly from the engineering department, asking what on earth had happened. A few concerned calls from friends. I ignored them all. My focus was singular. I had work to do, a future to build, not a past to rehash. Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Sunshine streamed through the skylight I'd installed in the workshop roof, hitting my main workbench like a cosmic spotlight. Perfect timing. I imagined Andrew and Logan, probably still basking in the glow of their decisive action, settling into their plush leather chairs, pouring their overpriced, ethically questionable coffee. At precisely that moment, Harrison's meticulously prepared cease and desist letters were arriving, not just by one method, oh no. I'd insisted on a trifecta. Courier, fax, yes, some legal departments still use them, and encrypted email. No wriggle room. No, it got lost in the mail. They were going to get the message, loud and clear. 7 a.m., Andrew's name flashed. On my caller ID. I let it ring. 10 a.m., Logan. Ignored. 13 a.m., the main office line, probably them both on speaker. This time, I answered, my voice deliberately sweet, almost saccharine. Good morning, gentlemen, I chirped. How was your weekend? Productive, I hope. The explosion was immediate. Elise, what in God's name have you done? Andrew's voice was so loud, so distorted with rage, it practically shattered my phone's speaker. I held the phone slightly away from my ear. Well, good morning to you too, Andrew. To answer your question, I've simply exercised my legal rights as the sole and rightful owner of 17 patents currently being infringed upon by Barrett Dynamics, I stated, my tone cool and clinical. Since I am, as you both made abundantly clear on Friday, no longer an employee, your licenses to use my intellectual property are invalid, effective immediately. You are to cease all manufacturing, sales, and distribution of any products utilizing that IP. You can't do that, Logan barked, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and panic. Those patents belong to the company. You made them here on company time. Actually, I corrected, leaning back in my workshop chair and admiring a new circuit board I was designing. If you'll bother to check the employment contract I signed 5 years ago, the one you two pushed on me because you didn't want to give me a proper raise and benefits matching my contributions, you'll see I was reclassified. At your request, remember? You moved me to an independent contractor status for tax reasons and to streamline payroll. Your words, not mine. Silence. Delicious, panicked silence from their end. I could almost hear the frantic rustling of papers, the urgent, clumsy clicking of keyboards as they scrambled to find a document they'd likely never read beyond the signature page. Because, of course, reading the fine print was always someone else's job. My job, usually. That reclassification, gentlemen, I continued, enjoying this perhaps a little too much, stipulated that any intellectual property I developed, while licensed for use by Barrett Dynamics during my contract, remained my sole property. It was a standard clause for freelance innovation contracts. I just made sure it was in there. But you still assign them to the company? Andrew stammered, his voice cracking. The Wharton bravado was dissolving like sugar in hot coffee. No, Andrew, I corrected gently, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. I licensed them to the company. There's a very significant legal difference. A license is conditional. In this specific case, it was tied directly to my continued employment and proper compensation. Page 47 of my revised contract, subsection 12B. I'm guessing neither of you ever made it that far into the document, did you? This is blackmail, Logan spluttered, resorting to bluster. No, Logan, I said, my voice still cool, but with an edge of steel now. This is business. Isn't that what you told me on Friday? That you're running a business, not a charity, not a family pet project? I'm simply conducting business. I could practically hear their worlds crumbling. The frantic, hushed whispers on the other end of the line painted a vivid picture. The smart grid line, Andrew said, his voice barely a squeak, all the air gone out of him. Elise, that line makes up 73% of our projected revenue for the next 2 quarters. And you just fired the one person on the planet who designed. It owns it and can legally authorize its production, I replied calmly. A bold business move, I must say. Let me remind you, before my weird ideas started generating actual profit, Barrett Dynamics primarily manufactured industrial switches and junction boxes. I turned it into a smart technology company. You fired the engine of that transformation. We'll sue you. We'll sue you for everything, Logan threatened, but it sounded hollow, desperate. Please do, I said, a genuine smile in my voice now. I would thoroughly enjoy watching you explain to a federal judge why you never bothered to read the contracts you signed, or why your IT support person was listed as the sole inventor on every single major patent the company has relied on for the past decade. Or better yet, how you decided to vote out the very individual who has been propping up your bottom line, and frankly, your careers, for over a decade. More silence. This time, it was the silence of dawning, horrifying realization. Then, Andrew's voice, smaller now, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. What do you want, Elise? What do I want? I repeated, letting the question hang in the air for a moment. I swiveled in my chair, gazing around my workshop, my haven, my true office. What I've always wanted, Andrew. What I asked. For politely, for years. Respect, recognition for my work, and fair, equitable compensation for the value I brought to Barrett Dynamics. We can't just undo the termination, Logan muttered, the fight clearly draining out of him. The board would have to vote. We'd look like complete idiots. Then I suggest you prepare to start ramping up production on basic junction boxes again, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. Though even that might prove difficult. I also hold the patents for the updated, more efficient manufacturing processes for those. Small detail, I know. I ended the call and placed my phone gently on my workbench. Under the warm glow of a desk lamp sat my future, a sleek, matte black prototype. It was my newest invention, a modular smart home hub. This wasn't just an iteration of the old tech. It was a leap. It could integrate climate control, lighting, security, and all household appliances in real time, learning user habits, and optimizing energy efficiency on a scale that made Barrett Dynamics' current offerings look like relics. Smarter, faster, more secure. I'd been developing it in secret, in my own time, with my own resources, for months. I knew, deep down, that a day like this might come. The calls didn't stop, of course. They escalated. Frantic board members, bewildered attorneys hired in a panic, even a former senior engineer trying to mediate or more likely gauge the extent of the damage. I ignored them all. My focus was singular, my new prototype, my new company. By Tuesday, a formal blustering letter from Barrett Dynamics' newly retained high-priced legal team arrived. It was full of accusations: theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, the usual corporate tantrum. Harrison, my rock, was completely unfazed. He responded within hours with a 17-page rebuttal, a masterpiece of legal precision. He included side-by-side breakdowns of each patent, highlighted the specific contractual language regarding my independent contractor status and IP ownership, and attached meticulous records proving that the core inventions had been developed off-site, independently, or under the specific terms of that contractor classification. He ended his letter with a beautifully understated line that I particularly enjoyed. Any further attempt to manufacture, distribute, or otherwise commercially exploit products based on Ms. Barrett's intellectual property will trigger immediate and robust legal action for damages and injunctive relief. Wednesday. That's when the real panic truly set in for them. The Tokyo distributors, smelling blood in the water and a breach of contract, officially threatened to cancel their massive order. Other major clients started demanding immediate clarification on supply chain stability. Rumors of a complete manufacturing freeze at Barrett Dynamics hit the financial news outlets, and their stock, already shaky, dropped a catastrophic 30%. Overnight. Thursday morning, my doorbell rang. It was Andrew. He looked like he'd been dragged backward through a hedge, then slept in his clothes for 3 days. His usually immaculate shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had the hollow, haunted stare of a man facing utter financial and professional ruin. "Elise, please," he said, his voice hoarse, when I opened the door. I stepped aside and let him in. I didn't offer coffee. Petty? Maybe a little? Satisfying? Absolutely. He looked around my living room, a space he'd probably never imagined, let alone visited. "We were wrong," he admitted, sinking onto my sofa without an invitation. He didn't meet my eyes. "Logan and I, we let our egos, our jealousy get in the way. Uncle David. He always lit up when you showed him your new designs. He saw your brilliance. We had the business degrees, the fancy titles, but you built the actual future of the company. And yet you dismissed me as just tech support, a dead weight," I reminded him, my voice even, not rising to anger but letting the truth of his words settle between us. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It was cruel, and it was incredibly stupid. We genuinely thought sales figures and branding presentations were everything. We didn't understand. Without the tech, without your tech, we have nothing." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "The board is in absolute meltdown. The distributors are threatening lawsuits that could bankrupt us within a month. Our lead investor for the European expansion pulled out this morning. Logan had a panic attack yesterday. Ended up in the ER. A tiny, unwanted flicker of something that might have been sympathy sparked within me, but I ruthlessly extinguished it. They'd had 21 years to show me a shred of genuine respect, to value my contributions. It took them less than 4 days without me to realize my actual worth. Funny how that worked. "What exactly are you proposing, Andrew?" I asked, crossing my arms. He took a deep breath. "Come back," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "We'll give you anything. Full partnership. Equal voting rights on the board. Full retroactive compensation for all your patents. Whatever Harrison says is fair. We'll restructure everything. We'll make you Chief Technology Officer. No, Chief Innovation Officer. Whatever title you want, just please, Elise. Save us. Save the company. Chief Technology Officer. A fancy title they would have begrudgingly given me years ago if I'd begged. Now it felt like an insult, I met Andrew's desperate gaze, my own unwavering. "No," I said quietly. "I don't want a fancy title that ultimately changes nothing about the underlying power dynamic. I don't want to be a salaried employee with a prestigious label. I want to be what I've always, in reality, been, the innovative core of this company. But this time, I want the recognition, the respect, and the control that reflects that reality." He hesitated, clearly not expecting this. "Name your terms, Elise. Anything." I let a small, controlled smile touch my lips. "I want 51% ownership of Barrett Dynamics," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Majority control, the deciding vote." Andrew went visibly pale. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking even more haggard. 51%? Elise, the board. They'll never approve that. It's... Then let them watch Barrett. Dynamics sink back into the obscurity of making simple junction boxes, I interrupted smoothly, while I launch my new company, Leora Systems, utilizing every single one of those 17 and counting innovations and patents that you no longer have any legal right to. You have a choice, Andrew. A smaller piece of a thriving, innovative company or 100% of a rapidly failing one. You'd destroy Uncle David's legacy over this? He asked, a hint of his old accusatory tone creeping back in. Uncle David's real legacy, I countered, my voice sharpening slightly, was innovation, quality, and teaching me to value my own intellect and worth. You and Logan nearly trashed that legacy when you decided I was expendable. I'm offering you a chance to rebuild it, to actually honor it. But this time, it will be on my terms. Unequivocally. He left without agreeing. Of course. His face was a mask of shock and dawning horror. But I knew they'd be back. Without my patents, without my ongoing innovation, Barrett Dynamics was a hollow shell. Their supply chains, their international deals, their entire financial projection, all of it was built on a technological foundation that only I could authorize, improve, and expand. They had backed themselves into a corner lined with my intellectual property. The week that followed was a blur of increasingly desperate calls, veiled threats from their legal team, which Harrison swatted away like bothersome flies, and panicked. Boardroom meetings I wasn't privy to but could vividly imagine. Another week crawled by, filled with tense, roundabout negotiations conducted through lawyers. The stories filtering back through industry contacts painted a grim picture for Barrett Dynamics. Investors were spooked. Key talent was polishing their resumes, and the wolves were circling. Finally, inevitably, they caved. Completely. 51% ownership. A newly created board seat, chairing the Innovation and Technology Committee. And the title of my choosing, Chief Innovation Officer. It wasn't just a title. It came with the authority I needed. The signing ceremony was a quiet, somber affair, held in the very same sleek conference room where they'd so gleefully popped that champagne cork to celebrate my demise. No champagne this time, just stacks of legal folders, the scratching of expensive pens, and an atmosphere thick with unspoken resentment and grudging acceptance. As I signed the final document, the one that transferred majority ownership to me, Andrew cleared his throat. He looked older, somehow diminished. For what it's worth, Elise, he said, his voice low, not quite meeting my eye. We're sorry. We truly are. We should have valued you. We should have listened. Logan beside him just nodded mutely, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Yes, I replied, my voice neutral as I capped my pen. You should have. There was no triumph in my tone, no desire to rub it in. I simply didn't have time for bitterness. I had a company to rebuild, a vision to implement. The very first thing I did as majority owner and CIO was initiate a full, company-wide patent and innovation audit. And just as I suspected, I wasn't the only one whose brilliance had been overlooked or deliberately shelved. Several incredibly talented engineers had developed truly groundbreaking ideas, concepts for products that had been dismissed by Andrew and Logan because they didn't fit the current branding strategy or were too technically complex for the sales team to understand. Translation: they hadn't come up with them themselves. Within 6 months, we launched 3 entirely new product lines based on those previously ignored innovations, and my modular smart home hub, the one I'd quietly perfected in my garage, the one born from my own vision and late-night coding sessions, it became the new flagship product for Barrett Dynamics, eclipsing everything that had come before. It was an instant market leader. To their credit, once the shock wore off, and they realized I was serious about collaboration, on my terms, of course, Andrew and Logan adapted. They were still good at what they did: sales, marketing, branding. But this time, they listened. They asked questions. They made an effort to understand the technology they were selling, the technical clutter they had once so arrogantly dismissed. They learned. And Barrett Dynamics didn't just recover, it thrived. We expanded from a struggling regional supplier into a respected national name, then a formidable international player. The 17 patents that had been my leverage became the bedrock of a modern tech empire. But they were just the beginning. New innovations flowed, protected and celebrated. But the real victory, the one that meant more to me than any stock price or sales figure, was cultural. The atmosphere within the company changed. Engineers, designers, even people on the production floor started speaking up, sharing their ideas without fear of being dismissed or having their work stolen. Ideas weren't shot down for being too technical or off-brand. Everyone knew their contribution mattered, that innovation was the lifeblood of the company, not just a buzzword for a marketing brochure. My name now sat at the top of the new letterhead, Barrett Dynamics, an Elise Barrett innovation company. A few years later, I was at a major tech conference in San Francisco. Andrew, who had actually become a surprisingly effective head of global sales under the new structure, was introducing me to a potential new strategic partner. "This," he said, with a gesture of genuine pride that I knew, this time, was unforced, "is Elise Barrett. She's the genius, the mind, behind literally everything we make." They'd once called me just tech support, a background player, easily replaceable. They'd toasted my departure, supremely confident they were cutting loose the weakest link, the dead weight. Instead, they had inadvertently severed the beating heart of their own company and handed me the scalpel to either let it bleed out or perform life-saving surgery. Because here's the truth they learned the hard way. In a technology firm, the one who truly understands and, more importantly, holds the patents, holds the ultimate power. And sometimes, the quiet one in the corner, the one diligently taking notes, sketching designs, and solving the problems no one else can, that's the person who can bring an entire empire to its knees or raise it to astonishing new heights. Not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a deep-seated resilience and an unshakable belief in their own worth. When you ignore someone's value for decades, when you consistently dismiss their voice and downplay their contributions, you're not just being a bad manager, you're meticulously writing the script for your own downfall. They thought they were kings, but every king needs a kingdom. And I, Elise Barrett, had been the one building theirs all along. Now, I sit at the head of that same polished glass conference table where they once tried to push me out. Behind me, the wall isn't adorned with generic corporate art anymore. It's lined with framed patents. My patents, our company's patents. Each one a quiet testament to innovation, a silent triumph. That champagne cork they popped all those years ago, it wasn't celebrating my professional funeral. It was unknowingly the starting gun for their own. They just didn't realize the race had already been won by the person they least expected. To everyone out there reading this, if my story struck a chord, if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or had your voice silenced, know this: your ideas have power, your contributions have value. Don't let anyone dim your light. Sometimes the quietest voices have the most revolutionary things to say. Stand firm in your worth, because no one should ever have to fight alone for what they've rightfully earned and created.